Japan rebuilds, but will China return? Now this is thoughtful. Hello, I'm Trevor Lai in Shanghai. The disaster that struck Japan last March triggered the worst nuclear accident since Chernobyl. While the Japanese begin the recovery process at home, companies abroad are struggling to regain confidence, especially in markets like China. Dave McCoggan, McCann World Group's Planning Director for Asia. You were in Tokyo on March 11th. What changes have you seen in the behavior of Japanese companies?
What they've tended to do was to put together some different levels of responses in terms of providing help to those that really need it and a feeling of security to the rest of the population. It's not just a case of saying here's a bunch of cash to help. They actually did a lot of things in terms of Uniqlo actually supplied hundreds of thousands of pieces of heat tech underwear to the most affected areas. SoftBank provided special cut price or no price services to the most affected areas, so they actually allowed people to have free communications for a number of weeks.
So how will the disaster affect Japanese companies' reputations as being perfectionists or being leaders for the future?
So I would say there's three types of countries, if you like, or three types of responses around the world. One is the immediate panic response that you might have had, for example, here in China or Korea, Hong Kong, the countries closest to it, which was perhaps overblown reaction to a threat, an immediate threat. Then you've got a sort of middle path, which is mostly developed countries around the world, Europe, North America, etc., which is concern, but also probably not a long-term concern about actual health risks, etc., but more does this call into question the Japanese business world's ability to service its own industries. And then the third area is quite interesting because there were actually a lot of people in a lot of countries, more in developed markets or developing markets, that actually responded to us that they in some ways thought that this actually improved brand Japan's image. Because they will look at it and sort of say, well, actually nobody has died from this radiation issue, so it can't be that bad. That there are huge admiration for the Japanese values of stoicism. But what was interesting for me was that within 2 weeks of the disaster, there were at least 5 major launches of new beauty products by Japanese companies. These were scheduled to happen anyway, and people just carried on with them. And it sort of seemed a bit strange until we'd done our first national survey. And in that poll, what we found was that women in Japan said, well, I'm not going to give up my beauty treatments. It's very sad, and I might tone down the colour, but beauty is part of who I am. Cosmetics is part of who I am, and I want to move forward with that. And so it was perfectly appropriate for brands to come out and just do normal activities, normal launches.
Thanks, Dave. And here's PT Black with a thought or two about China's role in Japan's recovery.
When we talk about China's relationship with the world, we tend to focus on the West. That's understandable, but it misses a key story. No country plays a bigger role in China's culture than Japan. Japanese products are everywhere. Rice ball snacks, glam rockers, minimalist fashion. Children in China watch Japanese cartoons. Forget Disney, it's the blue Doraemon who decorates backpacks here. And yet, anti-Japanese sentiment is impossible to ignore here. What are we to make of this? Here's my perspective. Chinese people have a very serious animosity towards Japanese institutions. That means government, companies, national sports teams. At the same time, they admire Japanese culture, art, design, food. Consumer goods fall somewhere in the middle here. Like the product, not so much the brand. That's why the tsunami and radiation scare are so important, because they hit at the center of the value of the product, its quality. Then again, we also read about toxic cucumbers in Europe. In China, overuse of growth chemicals has led to exploding watermelons. Japan offers more than just quality. Japanese products look good, they taste good, they use energy in the right way. So I see a mixed forecast. Challenges ahead for Japanese companies, but opportunities for Japanese products. After all, if a century of war and atrocities can't keep Doraemon out of China, I don't think an earthquake can either.
Thanks, PT. With me now is David Zhao, Managing Director of Hill & Knowlton Shanghai, Brian Cronkite, Managing Director of Burson Marsteller Shanghai, and Greg Paul, Partner at R3. Greg, you've researched the role that nationality plays when Chinese consumers look at foreign brands. How much do Chinese customers care about nationality?
Yeah, I think they care very, very much. They're a very patriotic group. We've been tracking through CSR initiatives in China over the last 2 or 3 years, and we've seen now that 9 of the top 10 companies in CSR are local brands. Coca-Cola is the only one in the top 10. Despite a lot of investment from multinational companies in this area, they're just not cutting through the way Chinese brands are.
And who are some of these leading Chinese brands?
Well, you've got companies like China Mobile, Lenovo, even companies like Yili, Haier. All of these are doing quite a lot of effort now in this area and really cutting through with consumers, and that has a big impact in their overall business.
Right, and I can imagine now with the recent disaster in Japan that their brands are going to take a bit of a beating, and it's going to be a challenge for them in the domestic market.
My opinion is that essentially that Japanese brands still are recognized for very strong products, products that are very innovative, very high quality. But of course there's issues in terms of food products and so forth, where I think you'll see a short-term impact for sure.
Right, and how can companies, I mean, David, how can companies really proactively manage these relationships?
In any crisis situation, brands and companies need to be visible. They need to go out and talk to the public and engage various stakeholders about the actions they have taken, or they're going to take. And almost like you are in a court. In this case, you are in the court of public opinions. And you will be judged not only about what happened, but also on how quickly and how properly you respond.
Do you think that the challenges facing Japan will actually create an opportunity for local brands who might be direct competitors to Japanese brands to win back some market share?
Well, I think definitely in the automotive sector, the Japanese companies have done pretty well here. They're going to find it tough, compared to some of the other companies. I think you're going to see the automotive sector, some of the local brands now are getting much better quality, much better product marketing, much better strategies. They're going to be much more competitive.
I just want to echo what Brian said. Before I came here, I did a small group, a folk study within my office. And the ultimate question I asked was, given the situation going on in Japan, are you going to stop buying products from Japan? Or will there be negative impact on the whole brand Japan things? Probably the answer is no, because there's strong brand asset within the brand Japan. And Japan still very much stand for quality. And even in food sector means safety. They have probably the world's most advanced or stringent system to make sure that the quality are in place.
Right. I mean, it's interesting that talking to the people that you did talk to, that was their response, because there was a panic, especially when it was concerning radiation fears, even a salt run.
I wish I had more salt. I had a lot more salt.
Exactly. So it's interesting. I mean, when you're asking about those specific decisions, I mean, it seems to be a little bit different than perhaps the mindset that was reflected in the media and in actual behavior from consumers who are rushing out to stores.
But I think there's a couple of variables here. I mean, one, you've got a nuclear incident, which by its very nature is very scary for most people. Myself included, a lot of people don't really understand what the implications of such an event could be. But I think the second thing that you also had an element where there was a lack of clarity of information. So even in terms of how the response from Japan, there was a lot of playing down the incident at first and so forth. So I think you had a void of information and sorts, and you had a lot of rumor that was being spread upon platforms like Sina Weibo and so forth.
And mobile as well. I mean, I don't know how many mobile warnings I received within days.
Right.
And it's typical in crisis situations. There's always discrepancy between the reality and the perception. That's where communications should play a big role in terms of managed crisis. So certainly, I think we recognize that there's a bad job to do for communications people in terms of get the information out quickly as possible, and also you need really focus on the actions you have taken, and you need to communicate, and you need to make it transparent.
But I think a lot of companies in China are not prepared for crisis communication the way they may be in the West. because it's a controlled media in some cases. They feel that, you know, perhaps the bad news won't necessarily get out the same way it might in the West. So they're just not as prepared as they should be.
But that's changing now. I mean, we've seen the tools, with the crisis, but also with the platforms like Weibo. I mean, that's changing.
Crisis communication is not only to do with media or with spokesperson, it's a whole system. You need to look at within the company, do you have the system in place? Do you have a plan in place? And the response was, this is something handled at home in Japan. There's nothing to do with our foreign diplomatic missionary in China. So that is the gap. And in a crisis situation, people would look at hero, look at salvation. Some people need, you know, in this case, the government need to stand up and be confident and need to talk to the public.
And I think, to Japan's credit, I mean, if you have a major earthquake, a tsunami, followed by a nuclear crisis, I think inevitably that's an enormous challenge for even the best of PR infrastructures to address.
Triple whammy, yeah.
Right. But that said, I think you still had some delays in response. I think the Prime Minister, I think it took around 5 hours until he actually came out to talk about the explosion at the reactor. You know, that should have been done in 60 minutes. And so I think speed is a key element to look at in these types of situations. You also had elements where I think there was holding back of information or playing down the situation. Again, I think that does not build confidence when people are looking at images of explosions, but yet they're hearing it's not a high risk or not that high.
That seems to be a common problem that we've, you know, run across. You know, there's a lot of the immediate reflex reactions, play it down, you know, try to cover it up and
well, that's a very Japanese trait, I guess, right?
Talking about cover up, sometimes even it's not cover up, it's even an attempt to cover up, or is it perceived you're hiding anything. That will totally destroy the credibility.
Yeah.
Sometimes when you talk about speed, I think there's a balance between speed and communicating the right information and also admitting whether or not you have all the information.
Well, social media is driving that too now. So consumers will be out there talking about this topic far more than they ever would before.
Right.
And so, you know, marketers aren't engaging through social media are just not going to succeed. They're not going to cut through in this area as well.
You know, I think if you look at the element, obviously, if you look at individuals, people tend to give humans and other humans the benefit of the doubt. And when we advise a lot of companies, these are kind of big behemoths, large organizations, and I think the public perception is not necessarily of a personal, warm, gentle human being. So I think it's important in any such situation that the company can try to demonstrate that connection to the people, which is getting that information out, you know, quickly, and not speaking on things where you don't have the facts, but at least demonstrating that you're taking steps, acknowledging there's a situation, and starting to build that connection.
Also, I think there's this scare factor, you know, place in crisis management. For any company in that situation, they will naturally feel, oh gosh, you know, the sky is falling, I'm the troublemaker. But actually, you should position yourself and step out of this troublemaker position to a position of problem fixer, a problem solver, and really communicate, demonstrate, and talking to the public the actions you have taken, and you're going to take.
Right. Well, these types of challenges always create opportunities for leadership, and sometimes, as Greg mentioned as examples, that leadership can be reflected in the marketplace as well. So thanks, Greg, Brian, and David for joining us today on Thoughtful China. That wraps it up for today. Be sure to subscribe to us on Tudo and YouTube, and you can also follow us on Weibo and Twitter. We'll see you again.